Welcome, everyone, to the Labor and Employment Podcast. We're back and pleased to be launching our fourth season. Yes, I can't believe it. Fourth season. I am in my Studio B, as everybody knows, so in Buffalo, New York, and I'm thrilled to have Mike Sciotti, my partner and friend, joining me. So he'll be joining me this fourth season. So you're going to have to listen to the two of us for the next 12 months. So Mike, welcome, and why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. Thanks, Rosemary. Happy to be doing this. Like Rosemary, I am a labor and employment attorney. Been doing this now for 35 years, represent solely management. Pretty much do everything soup to nuts, from labor and employment negotiations to handling discrimination cases to lots of training and investigations, all the fun stuff that we get to do. Like I say, I don't work a day in my life because I have the best job in town.
That's awesome. I agree too. I was with somebody the other day and they said that they did happy law. And I said, that's good. They work with nonprofits, helping them do, it doesn't matter what. And I said, I'm going to say that we do fun law. It's always fun. It's always interesting. So
you never know what employees will do, and we have all the stories, and I just shake my head 10 times a week. It's like, what did they do? And we got the funnest job in town.
Exactly. So, all right. So Mike, as you know, because I know you've listened to our podcast, you're a fan, but, in the past, we would always do this, fun fact. We kick off, each of the sessions, but I think we need to shake it up here, Mike, in season 4. So, I've got this, calendar, a New York Times calendar, and it's one of those how you have like word a day and those types of things. This is like a question a day. And so it's January, January 22nd when you're all listening to us, but January 9th when Mike and I are recording this. And so I've got 9 questions that I've had to answer thus far. And I picked this one, Mike, for us. Sure. All right. So you ready? All right. So here's the question. If you were invited to join or be on, whatever the right word would be, the internet, invited to be on the International Space Station for 1 month, would you do it?
Hell yeah. I wouldn't even think twice. I'd be like, where do I sign up? And let's go.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And my response was as effusive with a hell no, Mike. I thought, the thought of having to go through I guess it's the atmosphere and then have to re-enter it. And it just completely flips me out. And then being in that small space, I don't know. I'm sure it would be spectacular, but I could not do it.
Yeah. I say I can do it, but whether I'd actually pass the fitness test, I sort of doubt, but who knows?
Yeah. Well, we know I wouldn't. That's what I'll say, Mike. I couldn't pass the fitness test, but anyway. All right. Well, that was fun. So we'll see. I've got a whole bunch of these, which are a lot of fun. So we'll do those. We'll do those throughout the year.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, everybody. So thanks for joining us again. And Mike and I spent a lot of time talking about what do we want to kick it off, kick the season off with. And we thought, what should be top of mind right now is January 1, there were some changes here in New York State relative to the minimum wage. All right. And I say minimum wage, and all of you are listening thinking, well, big deal, Rosemary. We all know about the minimum wage. What some people may not know is what happens, Mike, when the minimum wage in New York State goes up.
That the salary exemption for exempt employees also goes up in a corresponding percentage. And what many people don't know is we have so many minimum wages in New York. Another repercussion is the Department of Labor republishes effective 1/1/2026 the employment poster for the minimum wage. And now in New York, there's not just one. There's one for each of the various minimum wage orders. So there's a fair amount of compliance and planning you have to do actually before 1/1 to get ready for the new year. So those are the initial things that come to mind.
Yeah, and actually, as I said, the topic for this particular podcast is around the salary thresholds, which we'll talk about. But as all of our listeners know, in the past, like when Lee and I would be talking, I might make a comment or he might make a comment, and we'll say, "Hey, you know what? Everybody should know about that. Let's talk about it." So let's put the thresholds on the back burner for a minute, Mike. And if you don't mind, you're talking about the wage orders. We could have listeners out there who don't even know what you're talking about, like what is a wage order? And so if you could just tell them about that.
Yes, so this applies to New York State employers. So we have two laws that New York State employers typically have to comply with in the wage and hour arena. The Fair Labor Standards Act, if they're covered, and that's the federal law. And then we have the New York State labor law, which has greater protections for employees, which you also have to follow in relative to a higher minimum wage, relative to additional posting requirements, and relative to changes in the salary amount. So one of the first things that, when we get a wage and hour question from a New York employer, I ask, which minimum wage order are you covered by? And a lot of times I'm met with, what are you talking about? Because it really, not so much with the three main things that I just identified, but each order is different relative to employer obligations that fall within it. So just by way of example, the hospitality and fast food workers have their own minimum wage order. In addition, farm workers, building industry, miscellaneous industries, and not-for-profit all have their own minimum wage order. And the not-for-profit's a little funky because there's two of them. There's one that applies if you just in general, and there's another one that applies if you opted out of that and is selected the other minimum wage order. I have found most not-for-profits don't know that, and they don't know which one they're covered by. And if the not-for-profit's been around, Rosemary, for decades and decades, those of us that are older remember the office fire down in Binghamton, the state office building, and the elections for not-for-profits were housed there and were lost in the fire. This is all pre-computers and things like that. So we have that issue we always have to work through because many employers simply don't know, and the records to establish it are gone. They were destroyed in the fire. A new not-for-profit, that's easy enough. We can figure out. But that's sort of generally why it's important, because it really sets forth your obligations, how you pay your employees. Some of the big things that we see are split shifts, spread of hour rules, and those differ depending on the minimum wage order. So that it's one of the most important things for an employer to understand and have a copy of. The payroll and HR people, you need to know the minimum wage order, and every year print it out and keep it because it's sort of your Bible on how to pay people for that year.
Precisely. And dear listeners, you may be sitting there thinking, okay, I didn't know there was a wage order. As Mike said, that he gets that blank stare, but where do we find it? You know what? Just go out. I was going to say, go out on the internet, put in, go ahead.
I find it, New York State minimum wage orders, and it'll take you right to the page, and they'll pop up. You can download them into PDF format, so you can print them out or download them.
Yep, exactly. And you heard Mike hit on a few of them. For example, the hospitality, you look at that, talks about your tip credits, right? So all of that is explained in there. There's discussions in them about uniform maintenance. So as Mike said, everything to do with, the compensation with your employees are in those wage orders. Very, very helpful. So, like I said, Mike, because you mentioned it, I thought, oh, we should hit on that quickly. The other thing, and then the other thing, Mike, was you made reference just briefly, it was just a passing comment about the wage and hour, the posters. All right.
Yes.
So just if you would just take a second and just remind everybody about their posters.
Yeah, if you're, but we have posting obligations pretty much federal and state. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, there is an employment poster that has to be up. It addresses minimum wage, overtime, and child labor rules. The New York State Department of Labor has different posters that address generally the same issues, but they're industry specific and they're tied into the minimum wage orders. They revise those every single year. When the minimum wage goes up, the department revises the employment poster, and you're supposed to take the old one down and put the new one up. You also see these requirements, Rosemary, pretty much under all the other employment laws.
Yep.
Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the Human Rights Law, the Equal Pay Act is under the Title VII one. But there's lots and lots of employment poster requirements that exist out there, and we'll probably hit that in another podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and so again, I just thought it was important since, in that intro, you mentioned those two things, and I want somebody to be sitting there thinking, what are they talking about? I don't know what these wage orders are. And it's obviously very relevant to our topic today. So go ahead.
You would also find them, the posters the same way you find the minimum wage orders. Just type in New York State wage and hour posters, and boom, it'll take you to the webpage, and you'll be able to download or print out each of them.
Yep. Great. Perfect. All right. So now we'll come back to what we said we were going to talk about, which is the increase for the New York State salary thresholds. So before we do that, I always think, and I think, Mike, you agreed with me when we talked about this, that it might make sense to give everybody just a quick refresher on, you've been mentioning the FLSA, but the exemptions, what we're talking about, because, I still get questions about that, Mike, and I bet you do too. I just had one 2 weeks ago from a client asking me, we've got this employee, they're salaried. That means they're exempt, right? The answer was, well, no, not necessarily. And we talked through it. So the first thing I want to say, hopefully everybody's aware of this, but when we're talking about the exemptions, what we're talking about is exemptions from the Fair Labor Standards Act, so FLSA, and the New York State requirement, overtime requirements. So that's what we're talking about, that you are exempt, an employer, or rather an employee is exempt from receiving overtime. And so FLSA has got 3 tests. New York follows those tests. All right. And I always say 3. Mike, you may say 2. Some say, so it depends on the L&E attorney. But I always say there are 3 tests. The first is the employee paid on a salary basis? Right. So they're not an hourly employee. All right, so that's the first test. So they pass that test, we get a little check mark. Yes, that's good. Second one is the salary threshold. That's what we're talking about today, what's happening in New York State. And we say salary threshold, we mean what is the floor? All right, so that this individual has to make this certain amount, all right, on a weekly basis. We'll talk about those numbers in a minute. And then the third is the duties test. All right, and so the duties are, what does this particular employee do day to day in their job? All right. And for a minute, let me just not digress, but just put a little more meat on the bones for the duties test. Can't tell you, and I'm sure, Mike, you've had the same thing. Feel free to jump in at any point. That an employer is saying, oh, well, here's the job description. It says right on here, exempt, because we've classified them as exempt. And then here are their duties. And my next question, or my first question is, well, so tell me what they do. Oh, well, they do X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, X, Y, and Z aren't necessarily on this job description, but this is their job. That's their job description. No, there is a duties test, and you can find all that information about what the duties are for a particular exemption. And I'll flip it to Mike in a minute, online on the internet. So you'd go in there and say duties for executive exemption or administrative exemption. And I do have to say the federal government, I think, has put out some terrific fact sheets. I mean, you can get those, and it's for each exemption, and it will go through and define, it breaks it all down. What is a duty? What is a primary duty? How much time is spent? And the individual, you've got to go through and actually determine whether that person is spending at least 50% of their time doing or performing those duties. It's okay to do some non-exempt work. We all do, right? We all do. Great example is in a restaurant. The restaurant manager would be an exempt employee, maybe if he's salaried or he or she is salaried and meets the salary threshold and salary basis, but they may be bussing tables, right? That's non-exempt work. But if they spend more than 50% of their time doing the duties of an executive in this particular instance, or I would say executive, then they're exempt. All right. So Mike, I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go back to the job description. That is a piece of the puzzle. It is not conclusive. Mm-hmm. The Department of Labor is not held to what you've put on that piece of paper. What the department does, if they're auditing you, is they will interview your employees. What do you do? Mm-hmm. They will interview the managers. What does Johnny Jones do for you? And they will ask specifically. And, if the job description lines up with reality, wonderful. If it does not, they're going to go with the interview. They're going to go with what the manager told them, what the employee told them, and not what's on that piece of paper. So the department can blow through the job description in a matter of seconds. And they're not held to it. So, I mean, it's an important piece of the puzzle. I like employees to sign off on the job descriptions. You're not required to have job descriptions, but I tell employers, if you're going to, make them accurate and keep them updated. Because the worst thing that you can do is give the department a job description that's wrong. And then they're going to start questioning you and say, wait a minute, you say this is what the job description is, but we talked to Johnny and Johnny laughed at this job description and he signed off on it. So we're going to blow by it and we're going to get into reality what the employee really does. Your point also on non-exempt duties. Everyone does non-exempt duties. Yeah. If you're an exempt, I mean, the owner of a company could be the first one in the door and there was a snowstorm, he shovels the sidewalk. Okay, this doesn't mean you lose the exemption simply because you do non-exempt work. I think the other thing employers need to realize, if it's a close call, they're not exempt. You have to fit squarely in the exemption. That is what the Department of Labor, either New York State or U.S., will tell you. You're either in or you're out. And to clarify also, we're talking about what I call the big four exemptions: executive, administrative, creative, professional, and just educational professional. Those are what I call the big four. Some call it just the big three. There are other overtime exemptions like the motor carrier exemption, the amusement park exemption, other ones that are out there that the outside sales, computer exemption, mm-hmm. They're a little different than the big three or big four. And let me just give you a quick, for instance, the computer exemption, Rosemary, I can pay hourly or salary and to meet that salary level thing. So they're all a little different, but that's sort of just some additional background.
Yeah, which is great. Thanks, Mike. Well, and again, we wanted to kind of make sure everybody's at the same baseline, right? Yeah. So you've got somebody, so it's the end of 2025. Well, you shouldn't wait until the end of 2025, but We'll just pretend. Right? And so you look, and yes, this all of my employees are properly classified as exempt or non-exempt. Okay, well, New York State minimum wage is increasing effective January 1, 2026. I know because I listened to Mike and Rosemary that means that the salary threshold in New York State is going to go up. So I've got to look at that. All right, so Mike, we've got we understand now what the tests are, what the FLSA says. But my question to you, Mike, is this. So, you talk about the big four. New York has got its own salary threshold, as we said. Is it the same? Does the New York salary threshold apply to all four, to the big four that you just referenced?
No, typically, if you look at the minimum wage orders, the professional exemption, the salary amount does not apply to, and it applies to the executive and administrative. If you're listening to this podcast sometime in the future, always double check the minimum wage order, because if you're listening to this in 2027 or something like that, just to go back, it could always change. So it's just realize it applies to the executive and the administrative exemptions here in New York.
Yeah, at this point, that's a great point, Mike, to check, because you never know. You never know. Exactly. So again, I'm just going to put a real fine point on it because, like I said, people get confused. So your professional exemption, if you're claiming that, so he said the educational and the creative, if you're claiming that, you still got to pass the duties test. We told you where to find that. Got to pay them on a salary basis, but you don't have to meet the New York State threshold. You have to meet the feds. You meet the feds, and I've got it down here. So, and what is that, right? It's $684 a week, which is, and I'm going to look down because my math isn't that good, $35,568 annually. So that is the current salary threshold for the professional exemption. So New York, again, follows the FLSA for the professional exemption relative to salary. So when we're talking now about the salary threshold increasing in New York State, we're talking about the executive and the administrative, right? And so Mike, I don't know that we necessarily want to give everybody all the numbers. But why don't you just at a high level, where can they find it, and just give them a high level.
You can always find it very simply, New York State salary exemption threshold, and it'll take you right to it. Right now, it looks like New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester County, and the fast food industry, the salary amount for 2026 is $1,275 per week, and for the rest of New York, it's $1,199.10. Now, you may say, "Well, I thought there were all these different minimum wages." There are, but everyone's sort of catching up, and so right now we have two salary numbers here in New York, and that's what we're dealing with. So you have to pay attention to where your assets are, meaning your employees. If someone's down in New York City, the salary threshold down there is higher than it is in Erie County or Onondaga County or Monroe County or Albany County. So you really need to simply pay attention. And every year you need to sort of self-audit yourself. Is there anyone who was exempt last year who now won't be exempt? And how do I fix that? Well, it's very simply, you increase their salary or you leave it alone. And if you leave it alone, they are now a non-exempt salaried employee, and they would be entitled to overtime. So you sort of have to do some planning here to decide, what do we want to do? Do we want to keep raising Johnny's salary every single year to keep up? Or do we want to make this person non-exempt? Nobody, Rosemary, has the right to be an exempt employee. This is sort of up to the employer. If you're exempt and I want to change your pay to hourly, I can do it. And people think, well, no, exempt, you can't change that. Of course you can. And you have to do a new wage theft prevention form, do it on proper notice to the employee. But you're in charge, employers. Please remember that.
That's right. Well, and I'm so glad you jumped ahead to the next questions I was going to pose to you, Mike, which was, how do you decide? If Johnny Jones, that was the example employee that you used, if we're going to increase their salary or not. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think it's a business decision.
It is.
And as a employment lawyer, I tell employers, hey, you're free to give away as much money as you want. I'm just going to tell you what the law is, and then if you want to meet that salaried threshold, great. And I'm assuming you meet all the other parts of the test. If you don't, you have created a non-exempt employee, and that person is entitled to overtime. And I'm not a fan of the salaried non-exempt employees because it's very difficult to take money away from them. The rules are different. I would convert that person to an hourly employee. And I think it's easier for record keeping. It's easier for leave issues and things along those lines. So that's just me, though. If you want to have a salaried, non-exempt employee, maybe to make the person feel good.
That's it. That's exactly why people do it, because they're like, they want to be able to say they're salaried. Yeah, I have a lot of employers who have done that. They're like, well, we're just going to do this because it's a pride, it's an ego thing.
Yeah, and which is fine. And then I always tell them, but remember, with a non-exempt employee, there are record-keeping requirements. We need to record their hours worked, and it's not just 40 hours a week. What was their start and end time for the day?
What was their meal
period? Did they
go
over 40?
Their meal period.
Yeah. So if you have a non-exempt employee, you have to track their actual hours worked, and the start time and the end time. Well, we have a schedule. No, that's not acceptable. That is not the actual start and end time. We also say track their meal period, and don't have an auto dock. If you have an auto dock, you just need to be aware of some stuff, which I'm sure we'll address in another podcast. But you need to record actual hours worked so you know if they exceed 40 hours in a work week. And if they exceed 40 hours in the work week, you're going to have to pay them time and a half. And if you keep, Rosemary, the person salaried, it's a bit of a pain because now we have to decide as an employer, does the salary cover all straight time or just straight time for hours 1 through 40? It makes a difference because if it's 1 through 40, you owe time and a half. If it's all straight time hours, you only owe half time. But that has to be clear and undisputable, meaning you can't be wishy-washy about it. Mm-hmm. And the employee has to basically know it. And if as long as you do, you're in great shape. But then you only owe either half time or time and a half, depending on the situation.
Right. And as you're talking about that, Mike, I think that would be a great topic going forward, for another episode where you were just talking about the straight time and all of that. So we should make a mental note of that. But a couple of points that I want to, everything Mike says is amazing and wonderful. He's brilliant. What I know is a couple of things I want to just point out or stress. So you heard Mike make that passing comment about you got to give them notice. That's right. Whenever you're changing an employee's compensation, their wages, you have to give them notice. What does New York State say? Well, they say, we'd like you to give them as much notice as possible, but it's a minimum of 1 pay period. I always say to my clients, do as much as possible. Morale issues, all of those things, which we could talk about for hours. But New York State says at least 1 pay period. So that's the first thing I would say. Second thing is you heard him make the passing comment about the wage notice. So we can do another episode on that, but so stay tuned for that. But again, we are required in New York State to provide our employees with a wage notice after the under the Wage Theft Protection Act. So we'll talk about that. And then the other thing, so I wanted to just emphasize those points, Mike. Thank you. The other thing, Mike, I want to just throw out to you, and I'm watching our time, so we may have to wrap up soon here, but I can't tell you how many of my employers will say to me, well, Rosemary, they're exempt. We're going to get in trouble if we're not paying them properly. And what they mean is, in their heads, what they're thinking is that there is this, this person must be exempt, right? And so they have to be exempt. So I have to just keep chasing that dollar amount. And so I just like you to again make the point. You made it, but let's make it again. All right, about that. So.
No one has the right to be a salaried exempt employee. That means, in the most ridiculous example I have, your chief executive officer of a company that has 5,000 employees, you can make that person an hourly rate employee if you wish. It is up to the company to decide. It is a business decision. Now, you do so you make someone exempt if, maybe it is for morale, but usually it's driven by, do we expect them to work more than 40 hours in the work week? Are they supervising 2 or more full-time employees? Are they performing what I call very important managerial level functions for the organization? We sort of figure that out. And then we decide, we have a budget. How much are we going to pay people? And are they going to be exempt or non-exempt? But nobody, and I mean no one, has the right to be an exempt employee. And sometimes employees push back and say, you can't change me from exempt to non-exempt. It's illegal. No, it's not. You just have to do it the right way. And so don't be concerned about that. Remember, you're in charge of your business, but be tactful. Remember, if you change how they're paid, they may not like it, and they might run to a union and try to do a union organizing campaign. So being diplomatic and nice, it gets you a long way in this area.
It does. It really does. So, so just Mike hit on these. And so just to wrap up, and then I'll ask Mike if he has anything else he wants to say specific to this topic. But so what should you be doing? My notes I'm looking down are, the implications. All right. So, your options, Mike already hit on these. If you have got these exempt employees, you're going and you want to maintain that exemption, you're going to raise their salaries above the threshold here in New York. All right. Or you may decide you have to reclassify them. Or you decide you're going to limit your hours. I had one employer do that. They said, you know what? It makes more sense for us to put more boundaries around. So you make the business decision, and then you either do the increase or you don't. Now, depending on if you're reclassifying, as Mike has already said, we've got record keeping requirements that are going to kick in, payroll system adjustments that need to be made. There's quite a few things that need to change. It isn't as simple as just, oh, well, you know what? We're not going to give them I don't know what that increase is, Mike. Is it from $100? I don't know the dollar amount, but you just decide that financially we just can't do that, and so it isn't just enough to say, all right, we're just going to leave them where they are. Now they're non-exempt, so you've got to take care of all of these things that Mike and I have spoken about. So anything else on this topic, Mike, before we wrap up? It is, what else is there? Maybe they need a new job description. Maybe their employee benefits are somehow changed because of going from exempt to non-exempt. You need to take a look at the whole picture and not have blinders on relative to, I can change their how they're paid. Correct. However, are there other things internally that will be impacted? Maybe do we front load sick time versus accrue it? Do they get more or less PTO?
I don't know. It is organizational dependent. So just consider all the issues before you jump and make a change. And if you're listening to this later in the month of January and you missed the change in the increase, what I would do is change it right away going forward and do a retroactive payment for the missed pay periods. I think you're going to be okay. The department should see that. And if you're not okay, there is some risk. But I think generally speaking, the department would forgive that because you did a good faith. Oh, we made a mistake. We forgot. We immediately went back, did a retroactive payment for one pay period, and fixed it going forward. I think that's no harm, no foul.
I agree with you, Mike, on that. Yeah, and those are great points. Great points, because you're right. There are some that, and particularly around sick leave or PTO, your non-exempt might accrue and your exempt don't. So those are great points. Thank you so much. All right. So I guess what we'll say at this point is thanks to everybody for tuning in for our first episode of season 4. We, as always, want your take on what we just talked about, the New York State minimum wage increase, and more specifically, the increase to the salary threshold. So feel free to drop your thoughts, your questions on Spotify. And don't forget to join us for episode 2. Now, I will tell you, Mike and I were going to talk about handbooks. We're trying to do this, those things that are top of mind for everybody at the start of the year. But one of the questions that all of us are getting hit with multiple times in the day is, tell me about this I'm trapped at work act. And so Mike and I are going to, in our next episode, break that down for you so that you understand what you can and can't do, and what the act applies to and what it doesn't. So, we look forward to seeing you in our next episode and hearing from you on this first. Thanks. The Labor and Employment Podcast is available on barclaydamon.com, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms. Be sure to like, follow, and stay connected for future episodes.